Hey, folks. Welcome back to the DarkHorse Podcast live stream number 52 Q&A segment. We are ready to go. We got some questions.
We got some questions.
We'll find out if we've got the answers.
We got some cats. We got a dog.
Yep, it's all happening.
Yep, it's all happening. All right, we will start with 3 questions from the last episode. Let's jump right in. In Turkey, Venezuela, North Korea, total submission to the boss is the common trait of all high-level political cogs. A beta trait makes them alpha males and influences the gene pool as well. Is there long-term significance?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I don't want to claim that I necessarily know whether the basic assumption here is right, but I will say this is a mechanism that one sees in hierarchical authoritarian structures where effectively the top of the pyramid has an inner circle that he takes care of, which is protected by the next layer. And so you have, this pyramid structure. And so anyway, I think what the questioner is pointing to is the fact that submission is the key to dominance. If you submit to the thing that's very powerful, then you end up very much more powerful than you would otherwise.
Yep.
So that's an interesting point.
And it's absolutely universal in strongly hierarchical structures, right? And it's more true between males in other species that are strongly polygynous as opposed to monogamous. Polygyny being the form of polygamy in which one male tends to monopolize the reproductive output of many females, as opposed to the inverse, which would be polyandry. And I think these, again, like you, I can't speak to whether or not the basic assumption here is true, although it sounds right to me. This is a decent analogy to a strongly polygynous structure. In which the alpha male is allowing some other males to hang around, but ultimately he has the last say.
Well, he does and he doesn't. The reason that he grants any access to anybody else is because he needs allies to keep him in power. And so the point is, it's basically a concentration of power phenomenon in which the wise move is for each tier to share as little as possible with the next tier in order to retain its position.
Yeah. Next question. What else do you have in common? What else do you have in common with Donald Trump, aside from censored online, pro-science but skeptical of establishment scientists, pro-lab leak hypothesis, against racism, Antifa, CRT, New Wars, the disc, etc.?
There's no end to the number of things that we have in common with him. We're bipedal. We've got respiratory enzymes in common, digestive enzymes, morphological structures at every possible scale.
Mesentery
to beat the band. Yep, so many things. I don't even know what this question means. I think the idea is that we are supposed to confess some deep alliance with this person that we are ignoring, which is nonsense.
It's one of two things. It's either confess your cryptic deep alliance that you have but you won't admit, or realize that you have this deep alliance that you haven't yet seen. And so we see both of these things coming at us. The first one is just not true, right? It's not that we're obscuring some deep alliance that we're obscuring. We've said often a number of things that we think that he has done, that he is doing, that are valid and valuable, and have been in some cases much better than or just like outside of the domain of anything we thought he might have done, and then some places where he exactly matched our expectations anyway in terms of not doing a good job at all. And but the second thing I think is a more interesting potential critique or request for investigation, which is, if all of these things are true about him and about what he thinks about what you think and the fact that they're aligned, why don't you see yourself, either of us, as more aligned than we say we are?
Well, again, I feel like there's just a trap here. Okay.
Sure.
So there's some structure out there, and it hates him and it hates us, and it hates us for different reasons, but it would love to portray us as the same.
Right.
I do not There are times when the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but my sense is, okay, you've got two different crime families. Am I aligned with one because I'm skeptical of the other? No, the fact is, we need good governance. We need corruption to be reduced from the massive influence that it has over our system to a manageable level. Yes, it'd be better to get rid of it completely, but that's unlikely. But in any case, I don't know why him. I don't want any part of this. Those of you who have settled on him as the vehicle are placing us in a kind of danger to address a different kind of danger. And sorry, no, I'm interested in the long-term well-being of the Republic and the planet, and that's going to require us to put decent people in office. They exist, so let's address the system that prevents them ever from getting there.
Any evidence for something like autism occurring in other ape or mammal species? Do you think psychological adaptations like this could have emerged very early on in the evolution of consciousness?
This is a tough one because
it is tough.
You're going to find analogs for a lot of things. How close the analogy is going to vary a lot. I think we've got a lot of novelty in our system that's causing this disability, which means there are a tiny number of species that are likely to have similar patterns. Those species will tend to be ones that are domesticates and therefore are also experiencing a huge amount of novelty.
Or just affiliates. There's a, that's not quite the right word. There's a word in ecology, conservation biology for organisms that do well in our presence, even though we aren't domesticating them. Things like pigeons and crows and rats.
I don't think we'll see it in those creatures because those creatures are subject to the same Malthusian dynamics where there's a limit on resources. And so if you're in the crow population, yes, your niche may be humans, but there's a limit to how much that niche can feed. And so it tends to favor those that are fully functional. And so in some sense, the fact of human civilization removing the limits on resources that people can feed themselves from, and also our domesticated creatures, means that there is a kind of ecological tolerance that doesn't exist outside of that very small number of creatures. And I'm reminded, I used to teach about two-headed snakes. I remember one from when I was a kid in the LA Zoo. There was a two-headed rattlesnake. And my point was that we are not responsible for explaining two-headedness as an adaptive phenomenon because we always see it as a one-off instance.
Yeah.
But anyway, because I've been tracking two-headedness and the internet has gotten so much larger, I now see a huge number of examples of two-headed creatures. And the basic point is, yeah, this happens all the time in captivity, and you never see it in nature. Why? Because a two-headed creature lasts about 6 minutes, And so anyway, the point is, it is arguably marvelous that we have room for a lot more diversity with respect to things like these parameters, but it doesn't mean, these things are in and of themselves great relative to a dire ecological situation that most creatures find themselves in. And so I think, it'd be interesting if we found these things in other populations, but I don't expect it.
Yeah. There is a question about whether or not autism might not be in trade-off relationship with something that actually the many actually high-functioning autistic people that we have interacted with and been friends with have seemed to have some very special skills as well that come along with it, and not at the level of savant. These aren't people who were truly dysfunctional in other areas of their lives. And it often seems like the savants come with extreme dysfunction elsewhere, whereas two-headedness is just an error, right? And I would say, for me, the right analogy for the two-headedness discussion is more like intersex. where it certainly happens in the wild, but it is an evolutionary dead end. And pointing out, having all of the internet available so that you can point out all of the many people who are intersex does not in and of itself render that condition an adaptation or render sex not binary, for instance. Whereas autism is potentially something a little bit more interesting with adaptive value even.
That's exactly what I'm saying, is that it does have adaptive value, but only in a context where it's not being forced up against the requirements of a normal ecological niche. So yes, there's no question. I mean, but blindness also will reveal certain things, right? We have many extremely gifted blind musicians. Presumably there's some connection there. Right. So anyway, yes.
Extreme deficit can force extreme talent.
Right. Yeah. But it doesn't mean we should be looking for blind creatures out in the world, because the fact is it's a devastating loss when you've got predators and things. Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Okay. Our question from the Discord server this week. We always get one a week that comes off the Discord server for those of you who are on there. Curious as to your thoughts on the stoned ape theory, the idea that psychedelics were a part of the development of human consciousness. Is there any weight to this hypothesis? Has there been any other analogous coevolution between an organism and a drug that proved beneficial in developing certain traits?
Let's put it this way. The stoned ape hypothesis is not as bad as the naked ape hypothesis, but I think it's...
Is naked ape the same as the swimming ape?
Yeah, the swimming.
Yeah, they evolved in shallows.
Right.
Yeah.
But what I would say is I would say there is a close relationship between humans and psychedelics, and it has a lot to do with consciousness. We see it in too many populations, various kinds of experimentation. It's not always psychedelics. Sometimes it's things like sweat lodges or starvation or whatever else it is that causes those same phenomena to be unleashed.
And low-level psychedelics like marijuana.
Right. Yeah. But the idea that that's what triggered us to become special, rather than having become special, this thing which to any other creature would be dangerous is useful to us as a hack, is, I think, flipping the causation on its head. The fact is, the very same thing that we were talking about in the last question, the fact that we are not constantly faced with predators and in need of spending every minute with reference to its ability to generate food resources means that we can afford to disrupt cognition in ways that sometimes reveal things that our conscious mind wouldn't otherwise know about. I would say, in particular, psychedelics take stuff that is all from your brain that is not available to your consciousness, and it moves that border so that you become conscious of those things, and increases plasticity and things like that. So anyway, your normal cognitive state is adaptive, and hacking it is also adaptive, and that's what's going on here.
Absolutely. And to the final part of the question, I don't know of any other coevolution between an organism and a drug, a molecule, or a whole species that looks like the latter part of human evolution and psychedelics.
If the question is about cognition, I agree with you that disrupting cognition by introducing analogs of neurotransmitters, I don't know of another version of that, though I won't be shocked if there are some. But the ones, there are lots of things like your poison frogs, for example. Your poison frogs, both in the New World and the Old World, two different groups of poison frogs, which lose their toxicity when they stop eating their normal diet, which strongly suggests that they are picking up something from that diet, a precursor.
Apparently it's a precursor molecule in the ants and the mites of their native diet that allows them to synthesize these neuroactive alkaloids that are deadly toxic to vertebrates, including us.
Yeah, so that's very different from the normal way that food and our own physiology interact, where you basically eat proteins, break them down to their constituent letters effectively and then write new words out of them. In this case, these creatures are borrowing a peptide, presumably, and building on it. So it's not what you're asking about, but it's analog.
That's super interesting. It's a different level of breakdown and rebuilding, and totally far afield. And you have no reason to think that I actually spent any time thinking about this. But when I was writing the science fiction that I was working on as Evergreen was imploding, but before it went public, I was specifically thinking about how humans who had successfully gotten to another planet that did have organic life, but had obviously a totally different evolution of life, would make food, and whether or not you would have to have, the biologist on staff break down into effectively elemental forms and then rebuild, or if there was a less fundamental level of breakdown, depending on exactly what the informational molecule on this different planet might have looked like. And I wasn't thinking consciously about my frogs, but I think that story, of course, informs a lot of what both of us think about how nature, some of the myriad ways that nature manages to make function out of the things that one ingests.
Yep.
All right. First question from today. I live in Colorado. Noah writes, there is a unity party on the ballot here. Obviously not Unity 2020. Who are these people? Did you have any communication with them? Also, thank you both for sharing so much wisdom and spreading the tools you use to gain it. Who are these people, Bret?
I'm not sure. Have you heard of them? I've seen Unity in various places. Mm-hmm. I assume most of it is the fact that we've landed on a resonant idea because it is a resonant idea.
Right. Even Biden-Harris is using it.
Well, here's the problem. You never know whether or not that was them discovering, oh goodness, there's something out there claiming that we're influence peddlers and that it's unity, and the way to deal with that is just to steal the concept of unity and use it as our own and make it impossible to track, or whether they hadn't noticed at that level. And the fact is, I think we can see in things like the banning at Twitter that as much as unity was a small movement, it was detected. The threat came not from the size of the movement. It came from the resonance of the message and the fact that anything that was non-ideological and was therefore empowered to call out both sides was recognized as a hazard, that it would not surprise me if they saw unity on the horizon and decided to get in the road by claiming it for themselves.
Right. Our global company's compliance manager made the following unsupported claim. Racism exists in the workplace as microaggression. She then recommended finding allies by speaking to compliance teams, legal teams, or even calling the ethics hotline. I'm afraid to be accused of racism if I question this topic. What questions can I ask to be respectful of these very important issues in the workplace, but still determine whether we are headed towards a dark place of unintended outcomes?
Well, I think if it were me, I might actually track down that paper, and we will put a link to the paper that we talked about in the first hour associated with this video, and I might actually deploy that, and I might say, here's the problem with your search for microaggressions, is that it threatens to find them where they aren't.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And then also the tools outlined in Helen and James's book, Pluckrose and Lindsay's book, Cynical Theories. Again, Cynical Theories.
Yeah.
That's a short answer, but I guess we spent a fair bit of time talking about this in the first hour. All right. Next question. Where are we? There we go. How can healthcare, college, etc. be a right when no one has the right to use the gun of the state to force others to pay their bills? It sounds illiberal. Fire, police, etc. are local, not federal, and even rape and murder are handled at a state level.
Now, wait a minute. There's sleight of hand in that question.
There is sleight of hand in that question, but I can't quite put my finger on where it happens.
It is in the phrase, no one has the right to use the gun of the state to force others to pay their bills. This sounds true, but is false. And the indication of why it's false is found in fire, police, etc. are local, not federal. So your point is these indicators that we all agree suggest a right of the state to collect taxes to do things that we think are important, like putting out your house if it's on fire, does not extend to the federal government. But that's a completely arbitrary division that you've drawn.
No, I mean, the fact that fire and police are local and rape and murder are handled at the state level, that's still governmental regulation and control.
And a demonstration that, yes, we actually do have, you can't decide to opt out of fire suppression.
Right.
You're going to pay for your share of fire suppression, and you will get it if your house catches fire, and you should be grateful because it's a bargain. But what I would say is, look, there is a whole set of false insight. In this case, it lives on the right, and the false insight has to do with, well, wait a second, I made that money. You're taking it in the form of taxes. This is theft, right? I mean, it's theft. Let's just call it what it is. And it's nonsense. The fact is, that's not where the flaw is. We actually do have a right to figure out what is in our collective interest. We have to do it responsibly. It can't be done, in a corrupt fashion. But there are certain things which are, necessary. And the fact is, you're benefiting from them constantly, right? If you were really that rugged individual that idea depends on you being, you would be spending all your time trying to figure out how to get yourself through the winter, how to put away enough food so that you didn't starve.
Regrading your roads.
Right. You would be
generating power somehow.
You
all
would
of these things.
Be fending off the warlords who decided to charge you a tax that wasn't legitimate for your ability to go from A to B. All the things that you would be doing if you didn't have the state doing them for you or facilitating that they be done for you, would be taxing you at a much higher level. So the question isn't, do we have a right to take resources from you to do things in our collective well-being? The answer is it being done well? Is it being done sparingly, right?
Yeah.
So just the final thing I would say is, you are part of an implicit deal, and the deal has failed, but it didn't fail at the point that we collectively decided to take resources that you personally were largely responsible for generating for our collective well-being. Where it failed is in exchange for taking those resources without asking you whether you want to provide them or not. You are due certain things from the entity that is our collective our collective force, right? You are not in a position to be a hunter-gatherer anymore. Society decided you are required to be a civilized person and to do civilized stuff and to give up the rights of a hunter-gatherer. And that means that society owes you the other side, right? It owes you an obligation to do the job well, right? To do it carefully, to make sure you're getting a good deal. And we're not doing that. So civilization is in breach of contract, but the breach of contract isn't in the idea of taxation. It's in how well society is living up to the obligations that come as the other side of that equation.
So I agree with all that. I thought that was an excellent soliloquy. I do think there's something additional here, though. The idea of paying your bills. So I think the person writing the question has effectively, they just list two things, healthcare and college. And I think the insinuation there is that these things are choices that individuals make and that other people can choose not to make. And therefore, because there's individual variation in how much you might want healthcare or how much you might want to go to college or how much it might be necessary for you to function in society, it should not be something that is state funded. And what things should and what things should not be considered universal rights is obviously a big part of the question that we need to be, a big part of the conversation that we need to be having, and a big part of the sorts of things that right and left will tend to disagree on, right? Actually. And in fact, of the two examples that you provide, I think it's telling that school isn't on the list, that we have so long since accepted public education at the K-12 level as something that the federal government is paying for, that it doesn't even show up here anymore. And the fact that so much of K-12 schooling is terrible should render it something that we should be considering. Okay, you know what? Maybe we need to really, really improve these things rather than continue to assume that because the government has paid for them for I don't know what it's been, 100 years, they will continue paying for them into perpetuity. But expand the idea of how much schooling should be paid for by the government into college at one end, or here in Portland, actually, on one of the local measures we voted on was universal preschool. And it's easier to see that actually maybe those aren't things that the government should be guaranteeing for people. And that's certainly where I fall. Like, I don't think that preschool and college are universal rights or should be paid for by the government. Compare that to healthcare, which there are good models in the rest of the world. And actually, everyone does have a body, and everyone does need to have a healthy body in order to live their best and most productive life. That said, so much of healthcare is so broken, just as broken as education is, for somewhat different reasons, but for some of the same reasons, because market forces and perverse incentives have rendered most of the practitioners in sway to the administrators, and in the case of medicine, the drug companies, such that it's like, I want universal healthcare for Americans so we don't have to be paying through the nose on a monthly level for healthcare that I think is terrible. But it's harder to argue for that when I know that most of the healthcare that's out there that's at least sanctioned by the insurance companies is not very good.
Well, I would say that part of the flaw in that is the idea that rights is the correct mode to be thinking of these things in. I don't think healthcare is a right, but I think that in a circumstance where you have a society that generates the kind of surplus that we do, that it is in our collective interest to give health care to everyone.
Now you've answered the question then. So what the question actually asks is, how can it be a right? And this is sort of why I just did what I did, because I think you were not answering the actual question. What you said was all correct in terms of what you believe and what I believe as well, and what many liberals believe. But the premise of the question is, how can it be a right? Well, as you just said, you actually don't think it is a right.
Right. However, you will note that I do have a right that grants me the ability not to answer the question.
Yeah. And I'm the one who pays.
Indeed. Yeah. So there are rights. These things that are shoehorned into rights are often not, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. In fact, the real question is, are we better off creating a risk pool that includes all of us? Does that make healthcare cheaper, more available, and a society better when people have healthcare guaranteed than when we vary in our access to it? And the answer, I think, is clearly yes.
Yep. Next question. What would be an example of a failure of capitalism that free and voluntary association itself can't remedy? If monopolies are bad, wouldn't monopoly on force, as in the government, be worse? If corporations care about profit, hit them where it hurts most, their wallet.
Externalities.
Okay, I'm not sure I understand the question, but you go.
What would be an example of a failure of capitalism that a free and voluntary association itself can't remedy? So, if I make goods and I pollute the atmosphere in so doing, and my product is therefore cheaper than another product of exactly the same quality where the company was treating its waste responsibly, then the company that is treating its waste irresponsibly will outcompete the one, all else being equal, it will outcompete the one that is behaving responsibly. And the consumer would be foolish not to buy the cheaper product because they don't actually clean anything up due to a tragedy of the commons. So, in effect, externalities require us to regulate in order that the costs of keeping the environment clean, for example, and there are dozens of non-exactly environmental analogs to this, but in the environmental case, the cost of keeping the environment clean is borne in the correct place rather than borne by those who are the most careful. So anyway, I would just say once you understand things like tragedies of the commons, races to the bottom, prisoners' dilemmas, the more you will see that many, many problems require a governmental solution. Now, I would argue it should be as light-handed as possible, but those light-handed solutions are required. Otherwise, you get perverse incentives all the way across the system.
Do you have thoughts on Joe Rogan's podcast featuring Tristan Harris? I believe that particular podcast should be seen by as many people as possible. From a strategic standpoint, PewDiePie would be the ultimate signal booster. Love your work. Be well. So you're going to be having Tristan on Dark Horse very soon.
Yep.
I at least have not seen Rogan's Tristan podcast. I did listen to Tristan's conversation with Sam Harris, which was excellent. I mean, we and Tristan are friends, and he's terrific, and he's really sounding the alarm on some very important things right now. Have you seen or watched?
I think I saw a clip. I certainly didn't see the whole Rogan interview, so I can't speak to it directly. But yeah, I would just say I believe Tristan has understood some things very deeply and much earlier than most people, and that he is sounding the right alarm. And anyway, I look forward to talking to him about where we are and what we do about it.
Yep. Do you see a link between the political left and right and lumpers and splitters? For example, left advocates for equality and spectrums, the extreme being postmodernism. If so, is the current madness biological or psychological? Talk to Professor Frank Ferretti. So I'm going to let you take the first part of this. I will just say that Frank Ferretti, whose name I feel like I'm probably mispronouncing, we met him when I talked at Oxford 2 springs ago. He is terrific and definitely a kindred spirit. Hungarian, I think, now emeritus, some university in Great Britain, doing really excellent work, excellent sociological work, actually. But to the first question, do you see a link between political left and right and lumpers and splitters? So you immediately saw something there.
Well, lumpers and splitters, this is clearly a phylogenetic systematist of some kind, to
or at
invoke
least someone
that. Or a taxonomist. I mean, who knows? But I can't. I mean, look, I have a feeling you're pointing to something. I don't spot right away what the analogy would be. It may dawn on us later. But I would say I tweeted something that resonated really well with people yesterday, I think. And it was effectively that if you, I said painting with a broad brush because you have to, if you divide the world into political left and right, I am solidly on the left, but that is not my team. My team is composed of those on both sides who understand the vital role being played by the other. And lots of people seem to think this was a sensible formulation. I'm certain that it is. But in any case, I mean, I think it's about as good an answer to your question as you could get. Down further.
Oh, you've just been at it today, haven't you?
Let's see. There it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So just like you said, divide the world into political left and right. I'm solidly on the left, but this is not my team. My team is composed of people on each side who understand the vital role played by the other. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and
right.
it's interesting. It's amazing how this actually works as a very good broad brush litmus test. That I hear a lot of people who are just pulling all out for red or for blue.
Yeah.
And there's almost no headway you can make with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people who realize that there's a dynamic tension here who you always make headway with, right? It's
Right.
like you find the person downstream of that discovery, you find a reasonable person.
Right. Many cats, like most species of mammals, become lactose intolerant as they grow older. Would you expect that lactose-tolerant cats be more prevalent among those segments of human populations that also remained lactose-tolerant? Love from Poland, Marcin.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
Clearly.
much so.
So just to flesh out the logic a little bit,
That's good. I like this question.
we have an enzyme that breaks down lactose. It is the lactase enzyme. We all produce it because mother's milk has lactose in it, and so we need the enzyme to break it down. In cultures that don't have a dairy tradition, you don't produce this enzyme beyond an age where you would be in contact with mother's milk. In populations that have developed a dairy culture, we create this enzyme throughout life, and it is often, in fact, maybe always sensitive to the presence of milk in the diet. So that is to say, if you're eating milk, your body detects that you are, and it produces this enzyme to break down the lactose in it. And in cultures where there is no dairy tradition, the ability to upregulate it in adulthood is either weak or non-existent. And so,
but it also seems that there's an ability to affect during development whether or not you've upregulated the production of lactase. So just anecdotally, and I believe there's some research that backs this up, but anecdotally, we have had the experience of traveling for months at a time in places where we weren't really exposed to dairy, and upon returning home, finding ourselves less capable of digesting dairy.
And then it quickly returns.
And it returns.
Body discovers that you're ingesting milk or its products.
So if that's true, if there is in an individual that has had lactase upregulated such that it continues to be produced in adulthood, which the one black box here is, has that happened in cats at all? But if that's true, we would expect, yes, that in, for instance, dairying traditions, that cats that live near milkmaids are likely to retain the ability to digest lactose throughout adulthood, because if they do, they're going to be really much better fed.
Absolutely. And the other comparison is not just within domestic cats, but domestic cats and their close wild relatives. You would expect the close wild relatives to be like populations that don't have a dairy tradition, where it just simply gets turned off and doesn't get turned back on. And domestic cats would be variable, very much in an analogous way as human populations, just as you suggest.
Yeah. Okay, next question, with another name that I will butcher the pronunciation of. Do you have thoughts about Yanis Varoufakis' theory that uncontrolled capitalism erodes democracy by incentivizing would-be quality leaders away from politics? So I don't know this guy, I don't know this thinker, but if that description of the idea is accurate, if that thumbnail of the idea is accurate, it sounds savvy.
Yes, and it's one of the problems. So again, if that sentence is an accurate representation, then it's certainly likely to be right, but it is not an unsolvable problem. In other words, if you recognize that this was causing a corrosive effect, you could correct for it. And it's one of the puzzles in how you would build a more functional, stable 2.0 version of our system, is how you would incentivize the the presence of the highest quality people in the mechanisms where their insight would be most useful.
Yep. Why does the news not tell us the truth? Do you think the West is dying a slow death?
Why does the news not tell us the truth? Because it is an irresistible prize to those who have the need for it to propagandize us. And so the problem is it's kind of it's an arms race where it would always be a great idea to have news, but the value of having there be nothing that functions like news is so high to so many that we can't find it. And anyway, that's another puzzle that has to be solved because we're going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You're at 40 minutes.
Okay. Sorry, where are we? Humans are very bad at analyzing risk, but frequently think in terms of luck. What's the deal? Faulty heuristic or useful fiction?
I don't know that humans are bad at assessing risk. It may be that they are bad at consciously understanding risk, and it may be that they are getting worse in novel modern circumstances
where they're not exposed to sufficient risk at young ages where the risk can be mitigated.
Right. But I also think that we misunderstand the problem because we over-understand individuals as somehow important. And the thing that has made populations important has been the fact that the individuals in them were disposable. So, you need somebody to cross the horizon on a ship in order to discover that landmass, which means you need somebody to badly estimate the risk of doing so in order that they're fool enough to try it. So in essence, I would argue we are built to lie to ourselves about risk because of a deeper calculation about the necessity that we confront risks that are very frightening. So
very
something
good.
like that.
Yeah. There is a biological analogy to the manuscript that you referenced, receptor upregulation. i.e. when the ligand is in low concentration, cell increases sensitivity to the ligand by increasing receptors. Oh, that's good.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah. Critics claim that we overreacted to COVID-19 given the virus's 98% survival rate. Aren't overreactions meant to be successful? Vehicle operation has a higher rate. Should we roll back safety standards?
Yeah, we almost certainly underreacted, even if elements of what we did were positively incoherent and are still positively incoherent, right? This obsession with signaling to each other via masks when we're outdoors is nonsense. And our inability to behave ourselves enough to drive the virus to really low levels or to upregulate testing, to generate high enough quality tests and get them widely enough distributed that we could actually effectively see where we were and behave in a rational way. It was all very incoherent, but we could have done a lot more for a lot shorter period of time and gotten a lot better result. And instead, what we kind of did was split the difference between two warring political factions versions of things, which in essence was pretty close to the worst of both worlds.
Yep. It created a tremendous incoherence, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you supporters of regenerative agriculture and permaculture? Have you gone into it from an evolutionary standpoint? Guest suggestion, Joel Salatin. And I may be mispronouncing his name, but this question from Crystal, I love this. So Joel Salatin was profiled in The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, which is one of my favorite books. And he, I believe, ran the farm southeast seaboard, Virginia, someplace like that, where he had pigs and chickens, and he's growing veg in a... I hadn't remembered that it was being called regenerative agriculture, regenerative permaculture, but there's a lot here that is valuable. It's not clear how well it scales is the one big issue. How many people can you feed with this kind of model? On the other hand, the number of people that you can feed with a spray it all and monocrop everything model has so many externalities built in, and the regenerative agriculture permaculture model doesn't. So this is another conversation that we need to be having. If we could not be talking about how everyone is racist when we're not, and get back to some of the important questions, how it is that we move forward with good healthcare, good agriculture, good education are some of the top issues, I would say.
Good.
Heather and Bret, please come to live in Miami, a truly diverse city with great weather and law and order.
All right, recommendation. You want to replace law and order, which is now a very divisive...
Dude, it's capitalized. It's the show. I think.
No.
You don't think?
No, I think they mean law and order, which the president has been invoking all over the place, and we all hear that gavel thing. And
I thought he was talking, I assume, I don't know, I was talking about the show, which I assume is still on because it's been on forever.
Well, it will be on forever, even after we're gone, and by we, I mean humans. The thing that I would say is law and order is now one of these partisan dog whistle things, and that's bad, right? Rule of law. That's the way to do it in the patriotic, unifying American form.
We haven't spent... I had a 14-hour layover in Miami a few years ago on my way to lead a study abroad trip. And actually, my first one in Ecuador before we went down together. And I gotta say, it was a very weird experience. I stashed my bags and I went, and I thought I did try to seek out the weirdest part. So I took the jitney or whatever it was to Miami Beach, and I got there, I was there at like 7 a.m, and it was already just weird. There was a topless female volleyball tournament going on, and there were cruise ships going past, and lots of people sipping improbably architected cocktails at 7, 8 in the morning. And I think I took a picture. I took a couple of pictures, but one of the pictures that I took was from the bathroom in the place where I got breakfast, which had on the inside of the door of the women's bathroom a picture of a topless man with a dog on him. And it wasn't sexual, except it was clearly like, hey, women, this is what you want. This is what Miami offers you. The whole thing seemed very, very weird to me. So I got to say, that's my sense of Miami, is very, very weird.
All right. I have the sense that it is a very normal, wonderful place. Please just continue to follow us. Heather and I will hash this out, and eventually we will find out the truth of Miami, even if at a distance.
Yeah, no, in terms, I mean, I actually, we're trying to make plans to get to the Keys, and then COVID happened. So I'd be interested to explore Miami, which is, I guess, the jumping off point for the Keys, at least. Why would you not recognize the positives of the last 4 years? No new wars, no terrorist attacks, peace agreements in the Middle East.
Oh,
absolutely.
We do recognize them. The problem is well, I don't want to say you, but the implication of the question has to do with the individual driving this. And, look, I would say if I was talking to Chomsky, I would say, how can you make this point in light of the fact that you've made this point in prior years about these adventurism abroad and the wars that we've started needlessly?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, Trump is a mixed bag. But the problem is the man's temperament, the driving force, the obligation to politicize everything is lethal. And what I would say, I hope you can hear this, what I would say is those of you who see the positives on that side and are tempted to look past the negatives because there are positives and want everybody else to do the same thing have to understand that you are in fact inviting in a person that is a package, and the package is very dangerous, very political, very temperamental, and that is not an acceptable solution. So am I telling you don't vote for him? No, I'm telling you, you don't have a good option on your ballot, period. That I can be certain of. So is it wrong to vote for him? Absolutely it is, as would be everything else you might do. But why you expect everyone who can see some of the positives that have occurred in the last 4 years to embrace the whole thing, I don't quite see it. And, I have no patience for what the other side is doing either. And, I take no position on which one is more lethal. I can say in Portland, there's reason to fear in
Portland, the lesser of two evils argument is clear, actually.
Well, the lesser of two evils argument on our local ballot.
That's why I said in Portland.
Well, but in Portland, we're still voting on the president, which is the subject of this question.
Yes, at the national level, it is not clear which is the lesser of two evils. In Portland, for mayor, the lesser of two evils argument is clear.
Well, even when the lesser of two evils is clear in a federal election, it's a very different puzzle.
That's true. That's aside from what I said. I actually think, and I think many people who are watching don't inherently know that this is actually, and maybe it's not what you believe, but I actually, and I have heard this from a number of friends this time around. It's really not clear to me which, put aside that we live in Portland for the moment, because that does skew things somewhat. If you lived in a place that doesn't look like it might head off into complete anarchy after the election, given some results, it is not clear to me which of these two clowns is going to be worse for the country at the federal level.
Right.
It's just not clear to me. So the lesser of two evils arguments doesn't make sense for wait a minute, why are you contributing to play with the duopoly reason, but it also just doesn't apply here because it's not clear to me which one is lesser. And no, that doesn't mean that I'm cryptically for Trump or that I actually have Trump derangement syndrome and can't see anything positive he says. Neither of those things are true.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. Two more quick things here, and then we'll go to the next set. What episode do you consider your best that showed the most foreknowledge of events and turned out to be true? Boy, I have no idea, actually, on that one.
Nope.
Just no idea. 600,000. So this, I'm reading it because I don't know what it means, except I have some sense of, I'm going to mind read a little bit. 600,000 cancer deaths predicted by the CDC this year. Just because it's Halloween doesn't mean you look intelligent with a mask on. So this strikes me as someone, one of these people who thinks that masks don't protect against COVID, and also that COVID isn't a real threat, and therefore, why would you protect yourself against it, even if it was useful? And this 600,000 cancer deaths predicted by the CDC this year,
Right.
that's actually lower than I would have thought, given that over 200,000 have died from COVID. That actually makes me think COVID is even more deadly than I thought. And cancer isn't COVID, and COVID isn't cancer, and it already existed, and it will always exist. So I don't even see what the relevance here is, except that this
Well-
is someone who imagines that they have the right answer, and the rest of us who think there's a virus out there that's doing harm are buffoons of some sort.
Two things. One, the cancer thing cuts the other way because, in some sense, this is something that emerged from my work on senescence and cancer years ago. In some sense, as you cure various causes of death, whatever causes you haven't yet cured take up the residual. So the fact that cancer rates are going up can mean something bad. It can mean you've got toxins in your environment, or it can mean something good, which
Well,
is
are they going up, though? I don't know that they're going up.
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
My point is a high number for the number of cancer deaths is in part because we have dealt with other causes of death. In this case, COVID is now a new cause of death. It's going to cause the cancer rates to fall because people are going to die of something that isn't cancer. That's not good. So
Yeah.
what I'm saying is you have to be cautious in figuring out what these numbers imply. And
Oh, yeah, that's important. That's really good.
what I think people need to understand is that people like us who full well understand that this is not nearly as deadly, the case fatality rate is lower than we feared, right? That's good. The immunity that is apparently generated by having been sick with COVID is less than we would hope, especially the antibody-based immunity. That's very worrisome. That means people are getting COVID twice, right? So,
And third, the long-term effects of it are worse than anyone was talking about or imagining in the early days.
absolutely. And they affect tissues that you really should be very reluctant to surrender longevity. You know, if it's your liver, if it ages your liver by 10 years, probably it doesn't cut anything off most people's longevity. Your brain, oh, that's very different.
Yep.
And it does appear that people who have had this sickness, even mild cases of it, have cognitive damage or brain damage that is detectable. So in any case, all of those of you who think you know how to evaluate what the cost is of things like lockdown and masks and can evaluate it relative to the cost of economic recession, etc., there is not enough information available. Nobody can evaluate these things properly. And so that means that you have to take seriously people who are informed and get the argument but disagree. So anyway, keep tracking it.
Yeah. Okay, first question from the current hours super chats. As a disagreeable person, I am mostly drawn to disagreeable people, and most of my long-term relationships are with disagreeable people. Is it a pattern? How much of disagreeability is genetic versus cultural? Thanks, love you.
Yeah, this is a great question. I do think this is it's a great test case because you would tend to, when you hear the word disagreeable, you tend to think, oh, well, I would like to not have disagreeable people in my life. On the other hand, disagreeable people are exactly the kinds of folks who will tell you what you need to know, who will stand up when it's not simple, safe, or convenient to do so. And so there's something to be said for, do you have enough disagreeable people in your life? How disagreeable should they be? Obviously, people who are disagreeable for no purpose other than being disagreeable are a problem. But, there's a question about what you're trying to maximize. And
genetic versus cultural.
I would say it's going to be almost all cultural.
Yeah.
Or at least all accumulated post-birth.
Right.
It didn't come to you in your genome, which, doesn't necessarily mean cultural. It can mean that you can learn it from being in the wilderness and realizing how things work, and then it can manifest in a social context. But
yeah. Yep. So hope you liked my article, right? I'll Fight You Naked. I did. I read it. I did enjoy it. Thank you. Given the tribal nature of humans, are we biologically capable of world peace? If not, what form of global cohabitation should we be striving for?
Yeah, we're capable of world peace.
Yeah.
The question is how you stabilize it. And we humans are clever. That's kind of the point of us. And what that means is, what would you have to know? What lessons would you have to reinforce that people understood that what they were inviting by engaging in a behavior like violence was going to make them worse off rather than better off? And how would you disincentivize those who sought to profit by engaging in violence? I would say it's a design problem, and it's one that we know is solvable because you could make this argument at every scale that we've already solved it on, right? In other words, we have a very peaceful society, which, yes, we are threatening to take apart for no reason whatsoever, but nonetheless, it has been, the sort of Pinker level point about how safe it is to walk down the street amongst people who have no genetic investment and you're continuing to breathe, right? That fact means, well, we used to be more violent and now we're less violent, and it works, and you don't question it because it just, it's the water you swim in. And the question is, can we make it the water we all swim in? Well, unfortunately, we've got to deal with some folks who don't agree. That's the problem. But if we can overcome the folks who don't agree that it would be great to be peaceful, then...
And we have to remind the people who say they agree what they're agreeing with. And especially if they're in power and they have the ability to cause the folks who don't agree to sit down and shut up.
We have to force them to agree with violence if necessary.
The leaders?
I don't know. I was being ironic. But, I mean, at some level, this is the problem. It's not that there's anybody we have to be violent against, but to the extent that there are those people and populations that don't subscribe to the idea that the objective is for us to be able to live together harmoniously and minimize violence, we have to be prepared to use violence to protect that principle.
Yes. Ghost stories. What do they do for us? How to explain sightings when different people have the same experiences independently without prior knowledge of other stories? Are there any ghost stories that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean...
It is Halloween. We failed to mention that.
It is Halloween.
Did you not know that?
Let's put it this way. Last night when I took the dog outside so that she might relieve herself...
She told you that tomorrow was Halloween. The full moon reminded you that it was Halloween.
I reminded myself because I'm just that with it. So it did occur to me.
Last night.
Yeah, that it would be Halloween, and then it just didn't manage to occur to me today that we had actually gotten there. But look, it is undoubtedly the scariest Halloween ever. Am I right about that?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Ghost stories.
Ghost stories, yeah.
What do they do for us?
Well, first of all, there's the whole idea of ghosts, right? Ghost stories are one thing. Once you've got the idea of ghosts, then you can borrow it for, spooking your date or whatever it is. But, why do people go to horror movies? It's a bonding
I think
experience.
of ghost stories like sitting around campfires telling ghost stories.
I do too, but my point is it's close kin. Whatever, going someplace to be scared, right, like a movie, isn't that far off from tell me a story that's going to spook me while we're sitting around the campfire. It's all closely related stuff.
Yeah.
So I would just say, the idea of a spirit world is pretty clearly, I would say, a literally false, metaphorically true phenomenon in which there is a cohesiveness that derives from the continuity. The ephemeralness of people is not all that healthy, right? That the fact that somebody exists and then suddenly they don't exist means that we are constantly in an upheaval of what the dynamics are. And, the retirement ceremony that you've talked about in Madagascar, where the dead are brought back,
disinterred
in physical form as bones to hear a recounting of the recent history of their group, tends to create, just think about it this way. If your aunt is the reason, your aunt is the reason that you retain civil relations with your cousins
Mhm.
because you're fond of your aunt, and your aunt not wanting to disappoint her is a motivation, and then she's suddenly gone. Oh, suddenly your reason to be good to your cousins is lower, unless you're going to have to explain to your aunt why her absence is has caused this change in your
Yeah.
behavior. So the point is, you are actually
It's a way of keeping the ancestors alive.
well,
But you know what it also is? Sorry, is it may actually relate again to that paper that you showed in the first hour, with regard to seeing something with more frequency as it decreases in frequency. So with regard to sightings, I mean, I know after my father died, I occasionally saw him in a crowd, and he wasn't there.
Yep.
Obviously, he wasn't there. He was dead. But I had, because my parents had lived to be close to us, I had been in this lucky position of seeing both of my parents, multiple times a week at that point for years, and suddenly no more. I began to see him places where he was not, and I didn't call it a ghost, but I was doing the pattern recognition thing. I was looking for the man that I loved, who had been very present and was suddenly completely absent. So, some of it is also going to be that.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very good point. I think that may well have something to do with it. And I've had that experience too. Even
With your grandfather, probably.
Yeah, my grandfather, and I remember it with some pets.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
is in some ways just a really good test of this.
See him going around a corner, right?
You see him going around a corner, and you know what happened. It's like an optical illusion where you're like hypersensitive for to see that creature, and it's not there, and you imagine it.
Oh, I remember this. Yeah.
Yep.
How much time are we at, Zach?
You're about an hour and 5 minutes.
Okay, let's do 3 more. How about that?
Good.
Okay, that's 600,000 cancer deaths, guys, back here, but we already addressed that, so I think we don't have to go back there. Can you explain all the election worries to a non-American? All of them. Why does someone have to concede? Don't you just count the ballots and run the college? Run the college, he uses scare quotes.
Well, first of all, the concession thing is a, what would you call it? It's a courtesy. Maybe that's the wrong term, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood.
What is a concession?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Conceding the election when enough ballots have been counted that you're going to lose is gracious. It
bookends the arduous nature of a presidential election.
Yeah. It reduces the hazard of your followers not accepting this. And so, we've seen recent examples where it didn't happen, So anyway, you do just count it, and it is the Electoral College, and that's the way it actually works. But a system in which we all understand that the civility of the citizenry is desirable, and that we should recognize that our political differences do not contradict all that unites us, that is essential, and we are losing that. That's part of why this election is so damn scary.
Yeah.
Is that we are frequently now looking into the eyes of people who under other circumstances would be comprehensible to us, and we are unable to fathom them because they are saying things that make no sense,
Yeah.
Noam Chomsky saying Trump is the greatest criminal in human history, Bernie Sanders suggesting that we vote for a supporter
everyday
of Antifa.
Anti-fascist.
Yeah, an everyday anti-fascist who,
when she is anything but,
lightly invokes Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
Right? These things are unimaginable, and yet here we are.
Yeah. So that's an incomplete answer, but hope it gets you somewhere. What are your thoughts on the ethics of veganism?
The ethics of, I can say that almost as a rule, vegans are among the least moral people I've ever no, that's not true. What can I say about the ethics of veganism? Let's put it this way. We have a sustainability problem. If your veganism is motivated by a desire to live more lightly on the earth, I think you're making a mistake about how we get there, but I understand the impulse, and I regard it as it's a mitzvah is what we would say in Jewish culture. So anyway, it's positive, but it's symbolic as far as I'm concerned for reasons of game theory, which I've described in the personal responsibility vortex, that your personal behavior is not the place to solve these problems. They have to be addressed systemically, or you will actually paradoxically make the problem you're trying to solve worse. At a personal level, I would say that unfortunately the problem is the more extreme you are in trying to solve these problems through your personal behavior, the more difficult it is to be properly nourished, right? So vegetarianism creates a problem for vegetarians. Veganism, all the more so, because it eliminates a bunch of the things that you would use to substitute for the meat. So probably from the point of view of doing the most you can for a sustainable world while not compromising your health, a small amount of consumption of meat and animal products is the way to go. Oh, there's one other thing here that I should say. There is one way in which I regard vegetarians and vegans as way ahead, morally speaking. And that has to do with the ethics of the way animals are raised, right? I find, as many people who've thought about it do, the conditions in which factory farmed animals are raised just impossible to accept. This is not our right to do this to animals, and the fact that we do this basically out of everybody's view so they don't think about it too much makes it worse, not better.
And we are lucky enough to be in a position where the meat that we buy and bring into our home to cook for ourselves and the animal products are not raised in those conditions, but that requires a certain income level. And I know of almost no restaurants where you can reliably expect that that is true. So if you ever eat out, you aren't you are not being wholly consistent in what might be your efforts to be thinking about the conditions in which animals are raised for our consumption.
And even if you manage to source all your own meat humanely, there's still a lot of animals suffering in appalling conditions, and so at some level, it's our obligation to collectively address that. Mm-hmm. But the hard point for people to swallow is ethically raised animals. That is to say, animals that are raised in a way that they are healthy and not existing that they are not tortured by life. They are not living in a feedlot or a cage or something like this. Animals that are raised in such a way, it is not immoral, in my opinion, to raise them and consume them. If they are humanely raised and they are humanely slaughtered and they are kept healthy, that can be done in a way that doesn't involve a moral compromise. And that is, in fact, what we should be heading for. But that meat will be inherently more expensive, and we have to accept that we would be eating a lot less.
Yeah. Assume Trump wins and we make it through. What realistically could we be facing in 2024? If Biden wins, what are the chances that Trump would try again in 2024? We need unity.
Yeah, them some frightening prospects. I don't know. I mean,
we very much hope that Unity 2024 is an active force long before the election of 2024 starts ramping up.
Yep, and we are accumulating the puzzle pieces to make it a more effective movement going forward. So yeah, we do need unity, and we need unity. Whether we have unity, the organization, the movement, the entity, we need the concept to change our behavior towards each other and for it to carry the day, because frankly, we got a lot of bums to throw out of government. Yeah. We've got a lot of people who've been betraying us through their corruption.
Yeah. So I actually want to drop to the bottom too, because one of them is just apropos what we already talked about, and one of them is particularly timely. And we'll come back to a few others that we missed next time. Please help. My brother and his wife tested positive for COVID-19. They have 2 young children under 10 who tested negative. What should they do?
Well, it depends on what your options are.
Yeah, it depends on what your options are. If they live in a town with close family whom they know are being careful, and there's any possibility of basically having someone else do the childcare until they test negative. That would seem to be the right move, but that is almost certainly not possible.
Yep.
Most people do not live in a situation where that's going to be possible.
Yeah, I agree. It's very unlikely that they would have those options. And,
And 2 children under 10, they're not old enough, almost certainly, to be doing all of their own food prep themselves.
Yep. And so there's a question about whether they test negative, family member can take over their care without getting themselves sick. It's a really serious situation.
Yeah. So, quarantine as much as possible to keep the kids from getting sick. And, the virus deniers will say, well, but kids, when they get sick, they don't get that sick. They then spread it to other people who get sick, and we don't know the long-term effects.
Yep.
That is the truth at the base of all of these things. One more, it's just a comment with regard in response to the question about, or the suggestion that we consider Miami. You seem like St. Petersburg, Florida people, Heather. The Dali Museum just reopened, and Bret, plenty rule of law. Los esperamos. # keep the republic.
All right. Well, cool.
We'll look into St. Pete's.
I don't think I've been to
Petersburg?
St. Petersburg.
No, I don't think I have either.
Anyway, sounds warm.
It's Gulf Coast, I think, and it's Panhandle Gulf Coast, if memory serves. I don't know my Florida geography that well.
Cool. Well, if travel ever comes back, maybe we'll visit Florida.
Oh boy, I'd go just about anywhere.
Just about anywhere.
Yeah.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. So I think we'll be back on Wednesday for our next episode, probably, because we may know more things about the future at that point, and we may not.
Yeah, I mean, we will definitely know some more things about the future, just
Yeah.
by virtue of being there at that point.
We may not know any more things about that moment's future.
Right. We are almost certain to be in the dark about what's going to happen. But we can at least check in and talk about what we have discovered. So,
Yeah.
all right. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. In the meantime, consider joining us at one or both of our Patreons. Dark Horse membership at mine, Bret's ongoing conversations at his, the first of this month's being tomorrow morning, 10 to noon Pacific time. And get outside and be well.
Yeah, be safe. We'll see you Wednesday.